Okay, it is now 10 o'clock, so we're going to go ahead and get started. So first of all, I want to make sure welcome everyone to today's discussion on managing people during the crisis. My name is Sam Reeve, and I'll be your host today. I'm the CEO and founder of CompTeam, and I'm excited to bring this session to you. And I'm pleased to introduce our panel today. So first of all, we have Shar Miller of CompTeam, and that's me there on the slide right now. That's not Shar, but so a little bit about me there. You can read my bio later. But like I said, on the next slide, we have Shar Miller. She's part of the CompTeam Talent Management division. And then we also have Aaron Graylick, which is part of the core consulting and coaching group. And then we have Debbie Shernick and Karen Owen of HR Cert Prep Pros. And you'll be able to review these bios and so forth on the website, on the CompTeam website, and also within the presentation. This panel is the first of a series of discussions CompTeam will host during the COVID-19 outbreak to help small and medium-sized businesses better manage during the pandemic. We have a lot of things that we're going to talk about today. First, we're going to start out with Erin. She's going to talk a little bit about the neuroscience of crisis management, and then Karen's going to jump in and talk a little bit about engaging and managing a newly remote workforce. I know that's a big concern on a lot of people's minds out there. How do we actually do something we haven't done successfully in the past? Then Shar will join in and talk about leading and communicating with compassion, dignity, and respect. And then Debbie will close the session with creative ways to reduce personnel costs. And she'll also be discussing retaining talent during the challenging economic time and during challenging economic times. Finally, to wrap up everything, we're just going to open up the attendees to ask questions. You'll be able to ask questions throughout the presentation. And so what I'd like you to do is just look at the bottom of the screen there. There's going to be a section that's it says QA. Just go ahead and type your questions in there, and I'll keep them at the end of each section. We'll go through them. We'll spend about 5 minutes taking questions. Now, also today's discussion will be available on demand after the live session, and you can find that on compteam.net. And I'll send you an email to ensure you know when that's available. We'll also have some helpful attachments there and some resources, including a hard copy of the presentation. And then on the website, you'll find a link to the next free webinar that we'll have in place. That'll be on Wednesday next week. It'll be at the same time. So I'll send each of the participants or each person that's attending today a registration link to make it easy for you to attend. Also, we'd love to hear from you. Like I mentioned, once again, make sure you go into that QA tab, ask questions, and let us know if you have any concerns. I'll be monitoring that during the call today. And if we don't get to a specific question during the discussion today, I'll send it to the appropriate person, and we can you can get that question followed up soon afterwards. And lastly, we'd like to encourage you to share this series to other colleagues on social networking or anything like that. If you think that there's another team member or business that you know that might benefit from our discussion, please invite them, and we'll include them on the next session. So without further ado, I'd like to kick things back over to our team here. So the first session, like I mentioned, is Erin's going to talk about the neuroscience of crisis management. So Erin, why don't you go ahead and take it from here?
Thank you, Sam, very much, and welcome everyone. There's no question that every one of us is experiencing a new level of stress and uncertainty because of all that is developing, and that we don't necessarily know when it is that we might be able to find a more stable period. There is an impact on our performance when stress becomes too low or too high, as you can see on the slide. When you think about things that you kind of avoid, maybe administrative tasks that you put off until the last minute, those oftentimes going to be instances where your stress level is pretty low when it comes to doing those tasks, either because it's not interesting or not challenging for you. And what we want to do is to move ourselves into that higher space where you seek performance. So there is a moderate amount of stress that will actually drive our performance to be at its best because we're most focused there. Now, the part of the curve that we are more likely on, and that's each and every one of us at this point, is slipping down toward that red. And what happens when we are slipping into that place is that our performance is actually decreasing at that moment. Now, there are two reasons why stress can really start to diminish our performance. The first is that there is an immediate stress, something imminent that's happening. A lot of what has happened over the last 2 or 3 weeks for the US is definitely this space. And also long-term accumulative stress, which is another thing that we're looking at too. So you can see that given the circumstances that we're under, we really have to be concerned about what our performance is, not only at work, but also in life. So there are two different ways in which stress can impact our performance, and I'll explain which, the physical and also the cognitive impact. So slide, please. So on the physical side, the reason for the responses that we have is because our brain is set up to detect threats. That's because 10,000 years ago, we needed to make sure that we understood what was going on in our environment to be able to respond immediately to continue our life. So our brain picks up a threat. What it does is it releases the hormone ACTH. ACTH then breaks down to two familiar hormones that we know of, cortisol and adrenaline. So once cortisol and adrenaline kick in, let me show you the physiological responses that then result because we have those chemicals in our system. So the physical effects would be an increased heart rate, tunnel vision, not a hearing loss. All of these things are helping us to do a fight or flight. Make an immediate decision that is very instinctual and has everything to do with preserving our life. When you think about the threats that we are experiencing, especially today, to have an increased heart rate, tunnel vision, hearing loss, all of which are not going to be helping us. So that is one of the reasons why we really have to be aware of the impact that stress can have on our performance. So the physiological reactions that naturally come out of that stress response, that fight or flight, is actually not going to help us cope with the threat that we have in front of us right now. So let me talk a little bit about what happens to us cognitively. Slide, please. Our brain is gathering information from our 5 senses continually. And what happens is all of that information will come into our brain. The first place that it hits is something called the amygdala. Your amygdala is your emotional center, and that is where fight or flight exists. So fight or flight means that we are only acting to preserve our life. And that means that all of those emotional responses are driven to either fight off the threat or to flee from it. What we don't have access to at the moment that we are having kind of that control of emotion, do not have access to the upper part of our brain, the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is where we do all of the learning, information processing, problem solving, creating options for ourselves, making good decisions, applying judgment. Rational thinking happens only when we're in that prefrontal cortex. So what's happening to us now when we get into a highly emotional state is that we are operating from our amygdala, our emotional center. We do not have online at that moment any of our rational thinking when we are in that fight or flight space. So what we have to do for ourselves is to try and figure out as best we can, give our brains the time to move out of that emotional center and move into that rational part of our brain. Because what we are faced with today are some of the most complicated challenges we've ever faced because we've not been in this position before. We cannot operate successfully from our emotional center. What we need is time for that emotion to pass and then to get to that rational center where we can really do some great thinking and problem solving. So Shar, one of our speakers today, was talking earlier about a tough decision that she might have to make for her organization. There is no way that she will get the outcome that she ultimately desires if she is not allowing herself time to move through the emotional weight of all of the decisions that we're going to have to make, and allowing her that rational side of her brain to really kick in, take over, and to think through all of the different options. Now, another thing that's really challenged right now is concentration. So slide, please. Our concentration works like this. It takes 15 minutes for your brain to become completely focused and absorbed on a task. And so you can see that there's a peak performance that we reach after 15 minutes of really getting ourselves invested in what's in front of us. At the moment that there is an interruption, we drop out of that peak focus, that concentration that's required, especially when we're facing complex problems. So once we draw out, it takes another 15 minutes for you to get back into peak. There's no shortcut. You have to invest another 15 minutes for you to get full access to all of the capabilities, all of your problem solving, all of your memory and information. So think about the last time you had 15 uninterrupted minutes to do work, especially within the last 2 weeks. So what that's doing is also changing our performance, because we cannot fully concentrate on things that are requiring a lot of consideration and thought, because these are new circumstances that we're facing, that we are not getting the optimum out of ourselves and what we are capable of doing, because we are in a constant interruption mode. So the thing here for us is, as leaders, know that this emotional center can be taking over at any point for ourselves or our teams, and to help people have enough space to process emotions so that we can get to that rational part of our brain that really helps us to navigate. The second is, when we are facing something that's complex as a problem and we need to figure it out, the best way for you to do that is to block time so that you can dedicate your focus and your concentration to that problem, and you will be more effective in dealing with all the things that you have in front of you. So with that, I would like to pause. Sam, how much time do we have for question and answer?
Oh, we have about 5 minutes of that. And I actually already have a question that came in just on your current slide. So we're all dealing with distractions, more distractions than we typically deal with in a regular workplace, such as kids, and making sure that we're helping them with their homework, and the dog, and taking care of them, and so forth. So is there some thoughts of how we can prevent these distractions, how we can organize our work? What are your thoughts there?
So the first recommendation that I would make is to find a space that is yours, designated to do work. I know a lot of people are tempted to set up in the kitchen or someplace that's central, but what happens is all of those distractions are whirring around you, and people know not to interrupt you or can't. So part of what we need to do is find a space. It doesn't have to be a big one, but something that people know, when I am at my desk, I am doing work. The other thing is, if you have a lot of distractions around you, if there is some way that you can put headphones on so that you minimize that. Visual distractions, for sure. You would never put a television up in your office, so if you have a TV up in your space, that's another way that you can pull your attention away. And then finally, if it really is something that you need a block of time, let's say that you are trying to pull together an important communication to your organization, then that is a perfect time for you to put up a sign for your family to know that you can, you and I can talk in 15 minutes, half an hour, 45 minutes, So you almost have a little bit more of a communication signal to let people know when you do have to concentrate.
Okay, one other question came up, and you were talking about the amygdala and so forth, and a lot of coworkers or managers that are trying to help their workforce. That there's a big response of fear out there. What can managers do to alleviate some of this fear in their employees to make them more comfortable?
Absolutely. So Karen's actually going to be talking about this as well, so I'm excited about that. So I'll just give you a couple of ideas that I have. First and foremost, giving people the time to talk with you about what's going on and not necessarily related to work. It's almost as if right now we have to settle into our new normal, and giving people an opportunity to talk with you about that and offer any kind of support. Now, the other thing too is that people will feel better if, one, they can see forward even a month or 2 months ahead. That gives them optimism. It stops that amygdala from hijacking and taking over. The other thing is that you want to put people back in control. One way that you can do that is to provide coaching people so that you're asking great questions and they can come up with the solutions. So two things: offer them the ability to look forward so that they're not getting caught up in the moment of the emotion today. And the second is to coach. Ask great questions so that you can help them get to answers and feel like they're regaining control.
That's great. Thank you so much, Erin. I think it's super important. Communication is the key to all of this and to alleviating this fear and ensuring that we have an effective workforce. So thank you for your piece there. Next, I'd like to turn the discussion over to Karen, and she's going to talk about engaging and managing a newly remote workforce. Go ahead, Karen.
Wonderful. Thanks, Sam. And thanks everyone for joining. I think you'll find that your choice to participate in today's webinar is going to be very valuable. And talking about choice, as you can see on my first slide, really we all are facing fear right now. And there are two choices that we have. We can either run or we can rise. And that choice lies within each of us. And it's very important, based on some of the things that Erin just shared in relation to your questions, that we're very aware of how folks are processing what's going on and managing their fear of not only what's going on currently, but what may happen in the future. So let's talk about working from home. Working from home is a major transition for employers and employees. I'm sure you all have been experiencing that currently. Now more than ever, it's important for leaders to recognize the needs of their employees. And in doing so, we thought that it would be helpful to refer back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And you can see that displayed on your screen right now. You can see that the foundation is built on basic needs. These are things such as food, water, security, safety, shelter, all of which I'm sure your employees are focused on now rather than their higher level needs. And even in some cases, really trying to balance their personal needs with the needs of the business. So amidst this environment, we see the role of the business in the short term as transitioning through three phases. One is enablement, which we'll speak about today. The next is engagement and inspiring performance. For today's purposes, as I just mentioned, we'll talk about the enablement piece, and then we'll start the conversation around initial engagement. Some of our future panelists over the next few weeks will be speaking to further stages of engagement and inspiring performance. So if you look at the slide, I tried to pick out some really good ones that I've been seeing in the news lately on how folks are making the shift to working from home. And I think that it's important as well to realize that this is the reality. The things that you're seeing on this screen are very much what some of our employees may be having to do to be able to continue to offer services to our customers. Prior to our economic uncertainty, a quarter of US workers work remotely. currently the larger majority of our employees are having to do so. So while this has been some employees' lifelong dream, and I know you all can relate, employees have been saying, oh, I want to work from home. If we can just work from home, it's really quickly losing its luster. As leaders, not only are we simultaneously experiencing the change, we have people who rely on us as their leaders to help them through the change. It's okay to show vulnerability and acknowledge we're in this together. As you can see on the media and in various communications you've probably had within your organization, the theme of togetherness couldn't be more important and more relevant right now. So what do we need to do? The reality set in. On this slide, I think many of you have started to deploy these pieces, but it's really looking back at starting with the basics, going back to the basic needs as we talked about. I can share with you, I've talked with a couple of people about their transitions from their work environment to a home environment, and it's been very choppy. Things such as tools and resources, communication channels, how to use their new equipment that they've got in their house, trying to find programs and set things up like they had at work have been a major challenge. So I think it's really important that we consider these items, especially how folks can continue to communicate with one another given a very limited environment. You know, they just can't look across the workplace or run to somebody's office. How do we continue to encourage the dialogue so that folks don't get isolated and siloed? So let's talk about how the initial engagement looks. So for the initial engagement, I know many of us have heard about emotional intelligence and maybe have even had some training, but now more than ever, that's really, really important. So a quick review on emotional intelligence is, you know, understanding how you're processing the information, whether that's a business leader, an HR leader, what have you, being aware of how you're transitioning through change and your self-management is very critical to the success overall as well. Then you have the aspects of social awareness and relationship management, all of which you're going to need to be, reaching in for, relying on, and bringing to your teams. The slide here provides some best practices. I'm sure these are things that you may have thought of, maybe some others are a good idea. I really want to bring focus to establishing a buddy system. Buddy systems can happen in two ways. One, they can happen on a personal level, letting folks know it's okay to reach out to one another as they have when they were in the work environment and establishing those checkpoints. But I think the other piece is on a professional basis, it's going to get real hard. Folks are going to be reaching out to all of the systems that they have to talk with people, whether that's instant message, texting, emails, conference calls, etc. It's going to be important that anything that we can bring from the work environment as it existed to the home environment continue as much as possible. So those are things such as daily check-ins, weekly team meetings, making sure that those team meetings start out with the opportunity for check-in and understanding what's going on. And then in those individual meetings that you as leaders are having with employees, the opportunity to understand personally what the challenges are, what's going on, how we can help, highlighting benefits. And I know Debbie will be talking about that a little bit later about looking at the benefits that you have in the company and making sure we're highlighting those, especially around the employee assistance programs. And then last worth mentioning is showing gratitude. Now more than ever, folks are really doing everything they can to make or to have the continuity in delivering business to the customers. So calling them out and recognizing them for their efforts is something that we want to ensure that we're doing, as well as any established reward and recognition systems that you have in place.
Karen, I have a question that just came in, and maybe we can take it real quick. The question is, my managers don't know how to effectively coach employees at home. The buddy system is a great idea, but they're unsure that the person that they're buddying with has the skills either. Is there some way? Is there a quick fix for this, or how should a company handle that situation?
It's an excellent question, and I think we're seeing that. For everybody, we're trying to figure out how to do this. So one is acknowledging, first of all, thanks for somebody for saying, you know what, I don't really know how to do this, or if you're observing it, giving that feedback and partnering with them. I do think, as we mentioned on a couple of slides back, anything that's going to be implemented as an idea or maybe new, I try to reflect back on how did we do it before, right? Understand that it was in the work environment. I'm hoping that, this may be just something new and they're thinking, gosh, is it, really different because it's over the phone? And I'd say, sure, it's different, but I think you have to rely on Zoom or things that you can talk face to face with employees. Maybe you provide, and we can certainly provide this in future calls, what some of that dialogue looks like. I do and would say in deploying such an idea as buddy systems is to have some ideas around and offer some ideas to leaders around what that looks like. And it may just be a check-in and saying, hey, how you doing? I miss seeing you at work. Just wanted to check in, and leave it at that and let the conversation go where it may. If you're tacking that onto a one-on-one that you usually have in the workplace, as I mentioned, same with team meetings, it's really important to have that time to check in with everyone and embed that in the time that you're speaking with your team, and then making sure then follows the business agenda and things that you want to talk about that are business related. The key here is it's not going to be perfect at first, but if there is an ability to offer some type of quick training around it, or if you're having a leadership meeting, talk about that, I think that would be great. And I'm happy to help too. If somebody has some questions one-off, they can certainly email me, and I'm happy to pick up the phone and chat with them.
Great.
So on this last slide here, I think germane to everyone is the, desire to be called up to greatness, to be an owner in the business. And I think we have to assume positive intent and reinforce the messages of togetherness. So in taking away from my aspect of this, again, we're going to have presenters over the next few calls. We all need to rise to the occasion, and now's not any different. And I really appreciate you all making the decision to join in on our call today, because this is just the next step forward in providing resources for you and for your employees. And again, we'll rise to the occasion. Thank you very much.
One other thing I just wanted, we had a great comment from one of our participants, Stacy. She was mentioning that every day they do a staff check-in on Zoom where they're celebrating or sharing celebrations and successes and so on. And also she's mentioned that they have a what they call a Marco Polo, where they're having they're setting up chats with other team members to ensure that there's continued collaboration. So I think that, once again, communication is extremely important here.
And I think, Sam, to add on that, just the vulnerability pieces, leaders, everybody's vulnerable. And I think the more real you are in how you're processing things and allowing others to share, really is going to be what's going to be key over the long haul to help folks process things. And when you're having these discussions and just the element of sharing helps others that you may not realize that may be going through the same type of thing, experiencing the same type of concerns.
That's a great point. I mean, a lot of times, right now, well, in the past, I mean, we can be focused on business and not really thinking about the human element too much. But now more than ever, the human element is so important, and this is really a time where businesses can really deepen the relationship with their employees and really make a difference, really help with that loyalty in the long term and help retention. So
Yes.
reach out to your people, definitely. Great. Well, thank you, Karen. That was an excellent and very helpful. So next we're going to go to Shar. She's going to talk to us a little bit about leading with and communicating with compassion, dignity, and respect.
Awesome. Well, welcome everyone. I'm so pleased that you're able to join us today. I am actually going to have a very different portion of our presentation today because, one, I'm a talent management consultant and I've been had the pleasure of working with Sam and the comp team. But also I own my own business. I own a business called Rocky Mountain Health Advocates. So, and I've done career coaching as kind of a hobby thing on the side. So I'm going to talk today more from the authenticity and transparency and vulnerability of being a business owner myself. Because it's interesting, I've actually had the experience of leaving corporate in 2016 and starting my own consulting company and working with my colleague Sam, who's been phenomenal, and developing my own method of what we do in the talent management space. But two, on the other hand, I've had a company that I've been aspiring to have talent management execution in the real live space. So today I'd like to talk about how I'm experiencing this with my own company. And so today I'm going to talk about my personal story, and I'm hoping that that will resonate with each of you and as business leaders, and helping you to think about psychologically what you're going through, emotionally what your employees are going through this period, and then how I as a business leader have been attempting to pivot quickly to move to solutions. So this is my story. When I left my corporate position in 2016, I wanted to lead with HR with the heart. I wanted to lead with being compassionate and having compassion, dignity, and respect for my employees. So HR with a heart for me was beyond just the traditional HR mindset, having HR policies and having HR programs and having all of those things that many corporations have, and really leading with heart. And so over the last several years, I have been developing this mindset around HR with a heart. And the next slide, I talk about one of the other strategies I was putting together was around the healthy employer. So back in 2017, I was looking at ways of how can we be an employer around physical, psychological, emotional, personal, professional, and environmental things to be a healthy employer. So again, my past story in 2017 was how are we going to make these things to be and create a working environment that really takes care of our people. Now, back to my story, my business partner and I started a company, and it just used to be the two of us. We did not have an entire team. It was last year in 2019 that we actually hired an entire team of 20 to 30 employees. We've had 5 locations and predominantly located at the malls. It's called Rocky Mountain Health Advocates. Unfortunately, with all of this change occurring, those mall locations are shutting down, obviously, for social distancing and all of the regulatory reasons. So I'm talking literally in the last week, we as an employer of Rocky Mountain Health Advocates have had to literally pivot to figure out what we're going to do now. So this is our live story and what I'm personally experiencing right now. And it's interesting because I have a master's degree in organizational management, all of these things, but it's interesting being a business owner and realizing what to do in this space. So the reality hit, obviously all of us in the last several weeks, the coronavirus hit. And I would tell you that my business partner, Sam, and I had quickly realized that the live event that we had scheduled, we had to cancel. And that's why we're not talking about that subject today. Sam and I realized that we had to pivot quickly to figure out what would be the most value to our employers, our HR colleagues, and the community to really help move forward. And so we quickly pulled together this webinar and tried to work together as fast as we could to create help. So my story goes to this. What did I do as I realized what was happening to me? As I was experiencing what Aaron and Karen talked about, I realized that this is what I need to do next. So moving forward, I realized I needed to brush off my prior talent management strategy. And so if you can go to the next slide, I looked at my current talent management plan. My current management plan was about leadership forums, learning and development, employee engagement, recruitment, employee communications. In fact, my company had a talent management dashboard at the time. We were attempting to model what would be the best to be a best employer. We were attempting to have the Zoom calls every week, the constant communication. We had built an entire employee base with an awesome director and all of our managers to show that we were an excellent employer. I will tell you from my personal experience, we started exhibiting those behaviors around fear, panic, communication, about how we're going to go through those challenges. And I quickly realized that we had some company core values that we talked about at the beginning of our organization, which is around compassion, dignity, and respect. In fact, one of our great leaders had put together a video and talked about our core values was compassion, dignity, and respect. We kind of joke about that because that was our core values when we started our company. So within the last several days, I've had to realize all those HR programs, all of those talent management strategies perhaps don't apply as of today. Those don't necessarily work. Right now, myself, my leaders, and my staff and my senior leaders are not talking about the best talent management scoreboard or recruiting practices or what we're doing to do performance evaluations. Right now, we're talking about how can we exhibit being compassionate? How can we exhibit having dignity for our employees? And how can we have respect for our employees? And so I'm going to go through just a few examples of what we've done. So for example, in the compassion, obviously, I think first and foremost, we need to think about not only what's happening as far as the emergency protocols for as an employer, such as washing hands or sanitizing our workspace, or now that we need to go to mobile work. We also need to talk about what's your family strategy and your own personal strategy as far as what you're doing to help your family get groceries, be able to sanitize your homes, and be able to take care of yourself. So our leaders are focusing on our employees and what we're talking about, what's your family plan? And I think that is so number one important. Also, we're talking about how we're staying connected. So obviously texting, calling, Zoom calls, which we will have future sessions about how to coordinate a Zoom call. How do we stay connected? And also maybe sending out cards and connecting with one another. So that is what we're talking about with our compassionate side. I will tell you on a quick note, just this morning as an employer and as I was coordinating the Zoom call, my internet shut down just this morning. And I was kind of panicking a little bit, but I had a great team that I connected with and said, okay, we're going to be able to get your internet up and we're going to be able to keep going. So again, keeping in touch, connecting with your resources, and being compassionate. And the next thing is about our leadership development aspect. Initially, we were talking about what we could do around, good to great. Well, from the leadership aspect, we need to talk about how can we be humble and have inquiry and question each other and helping each other through this. So the next area, again, back to our values as Rocky Mountain Health advocates, is one of our values is around dignity. And so with our dignity aspect is that a lot of our employees are really struggling for the fact that this job that we have, in our instance, our malls are shutting down. So our locations are shutting down. So with that, our employees are now having to pivot extremely fast to decide what new positions that they're going to do, or what are they going to do to be able to pay the rent, or what are they going to be able to do to pay the mortgage. And so our employees are scrambling very quickly with what they're going to do. So one of the strategies that we're doing is talking about what are you going to do to be able to bring income into your family during this crucial time. So for example, here's some images of some of my employees and my great team at just being vulnerable and sharing my own team. The top picture there is a colorful picture, is a gentleman by the name of Cameron. Cameron is actually one of our managers right now. And Cameron has self-admittedly indicated that he's been struggling with productivity and sales and the aspects of running our business. We were already talking about what can he do perhaps as a side business. Well, he happens to be a phenomenal drummer. He is absolutely amazing, and he has actually had just amazing bands and everywhere. Probably a little harder than this audience would listen to, so it's a little more heavy metal. But we've been talking about perhaps he could do online drumming training or lessons, and he could perhaps help all the parents that are going through homeschooling right now around music. And it just so happens that he used to do online, or not online, but actual training or tutoring for youth around drumming. So we've been talking about that as I'm connecting in with him to think about other ways that he could work remotely as we're going through this period. Down below, that's my beautiful Susan. Susan is the director of my company, and she is one of the most compassionate and endearing leaders that I've ever worked with. And she absolutely wears her heart on her sleeve. And her and I have been talking in depth about what we can do to help our employees pivot during this situation. We are currently making decisions. Do we need to lay off our employees in order for them to get unemployment benefits, or do we need to furlough? So, and other things like that, which is why my HR colleagues are here to support us as we make those hard decisions. Susan and I are talking about how we could perhaps look at other business opportunities around low-cost healthcare and utilizing some of our talent and expertise to perhaps take Rocky Mountain Health Advocates and make it a different type of business. And then below is my dear business partner, Bruce Franklin. He's our CEO. He's going through the emotional aspects of how to run this business as well. So all of these things that we're talking about in our forum here is going to apply to us, and we are going to be capitalizing on that. And then the last thing is around respect. So again, back to our company values, we have been looking at how do we respect one another through this place? How do we go through this transition as employees and as leaders and in our communities? We happen to live in Denver, myself and my business partner, Bruce, and we are the first that have now been mandated to stay at home. So we are, at least in Colorado, that I've noticed. And I am now seeing how our own community is trying to show a sense of respect and support for one another. And we're going through this journey. But back to our employees, we have to think about each of you in your own home communities may have these stay-at-home mandates. So how can we support one another through this? How can we respect one another, take care of each other, provide career opportunity, and connect? Down below there is a picture of two white gentlemen that are talking about what I call the whiteboard. And this is where you see the handwriting on the whiteboard. This is where companies are trying to figure out if we need to lay off our employees or furlough our employees, or what are we going to do through that space? So all of this that we're talking about with these forums is what we're going to do to help you, support you as we go through this challenge. And down to the right there is a letter from a nurse. A nurse actually talked about in our healthcare community the struggles of being a nurse and a healthcare provider right now. During the Aurora shootings and all that horrible, tragic event, the nurses went through such a tragic time and felt that at least some of the nurses that I've talked to, and I'm not picking on any particular healthcare system, but a lot of the nurses felt like the senior leaders were so disconnected with what was happening on the front line and didn't understand what it's like to hold a patient's heart in their hands and didn't connect appropriately and come into the night shift and actually be there with their staff. So when we talk about respect, we have to remember that as senior leaders.
Great, thanks, Shar. One thing that I'd like to add, I mean, just in realizing that the new environment where our employees are working in, mean, right now we have this shelter-in-place orders in a lot of areas across the United States and globe, for that matter. And our employees are subjected to a work environment where they're just getting batty, right? They have to, some of their old go-tos for relaxing, such as watching TV and so forth, is just a frustrating environment. So I had one of my clients yesterday tell me about how, you know, in addition to doing their work at home, they have to help their child with schooling and so forth. And their child came to them the other day and said that, oh, I need help with this long division. And my contact said, I don't know how to do this. I haven't done this since I was in grade school. I don't know how to help you. And so there's a greater frustration there. And Shar was just telling me the other day that another piece was we have our college students that are coming home, and they're used to being social and getting out of the house, and they have a great amount of frustration as they're home. So as an idea, I believe, Shar, you mentioned that some of your college students that came home are doing some tutoring.
Yes, as a matter of fact, thank you. My daughter's in a situation where she is going to or CU, and they announced that she, obviously needs to do online courses. So now she's at home. And then also her friend is also looking at, he was displaced from his dorms, and he's going to also move in here like tonight at 9 p.m. actually. And I've been quickly, in addition to Cameron, which is one of my employees, and Susan, which I showed, I have Ashley and her friend Ethan, and I've been quickly trying to figure out how could they do home tutoring for our youth and offer that personal touch for our children. And Erin earlier had her little son on our webinar. We were laughing because he was in the background. He's so super sweet. But we need to take care of our children. So I don't think relying on our educational systems to do all the education and allowing our kids to be watching YouTubes and all of that. I suggest that we do look at our college or younger generation and get them employed. Only charge $15 an hour or something very inexpensive, and get them engaged so they feel like they're making a difference with our youth. And so I am attempting to model that with all my employees, and then also with my college age kids. So yeah, thank you, Sam. We're trying that out.
Yeah, and then I think this is a great idea for business as well. We should not forget about our social outreach programs. Right now, more than ever, these nonprofits and so forth need help, and it's important for us to think of creative ways where we can engage our at-home staff to feel like they're getting a sense of purpose, that they can use their time outside of work to help the community in a way that is effective. So I encourage creative thinking there. Thank you, Sean.
I would say from a personal standpoint, I mean, the little things like internet connection, how to use Zoom, where those private offices are going to be, as well as taking care of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I'm going through this personal situation right now, and I would say a lot of our leaders are going through the same. So offering compassion, dignity, and respect in this time of change is going to be so vital. So in closing, I just say, brush off your company values. They're not going to be the same of ours that I've shared on my personal story, but brush off those company values, and then perhaps modify your talent management strategy in the new direction of the new day. So thank you for the time.
Great, thanks, Shar. So next, we'll be moving on. Debbie's going to talk about creative ways to reduce personnel costs and retain talent during these challenging economic times.
Great, thank you, Sam. Hi, I'm Debbie Shernick with HR Cert Prep Pros, and I'm really thrilled to be participating on today's panel. So let's look now at some ways that we can simultaneously retain talent and reduce personnel costs as we navigate this unique and challenging time. The news is changing seemingly by the hour. As a matter of fact, I'm actually monitoring the alerts that are coming in on my phone from the Denver Post and CNN and 9 News, etc. And things are changing by the hour. So we're all working tirelessly to stay informed and adapt to these changes. And I would say we're really appreciative to have all of you on the webinar today from around the country and perhaps around the globe. So many of the suggestions that you're going to see in this portion of our presentation will apply globally, but some of them are targeted to the many attendees we have who are based here in Colorado. So for example, these latest announcements, including stay-at-home orders that we expect will be expanded in the coming days. And a matter of fact, they've been expanded since we've been on this webinar to include, in addition to Denver, we have City and County of Boulder, Pickett and San Miguel counties. Just added for stay-at-home orders has been Jefferson County, Adams County, Arapahoe, and Douglas County. So you'll want to be staying up with all of these as we're continuing to monitor what we need to do to support both our organizations and our employees. So some of the things that we want to be talking about during this time of uncertainty is our inability to fully and accurately predict even the near future. So we as HR professionals and business leaders must still strive to ask the right questions and make the best decisions that we can given the information we have before us. Because the truth is, the answer to many of these questions is we simply don't know, and yet we have to act. So there are steps that we can take and options that are available. So what if your organization has the resources and the runway to ride out this crisis for at least a certain period of time with minimal cutbacks? Perhaps your business has dropped off and you have access to productive capacity on your team. If you're in this fortunate position, now is the time to upskill your workforce. Expand the systems and technology expertise, such as Zoom, Slack, some of the other things that our panelists have been talking about. Even Excel, Outlook, PowerPoint. Streamline business processes. Implement cross-training and job rotation programs. Convert that ever-present backlog, you know which one I'm talking about, that backlog of to-do projects into done projects. It's really important during this time, again, if you're in this situation, that we are engaging and motivating our current workers so that we can be better positioned when the economy does turn around. So we never seem to have enough time for all of these things. So now that you do, be sure to take advantage to the best ability that you have of these opportunities. And I came across this really timely quote from the Aspen Institute. This actually was posted right about the time that the coronavirus was hitting in China. And as you can see, it's recommending that during recessions and economic downturns, if we halt our investment in upskilling, we're making a really strategic mistake that deprives us of opportunities that we can exploit while we have this time. So again, this is for those of you who do have a financial cushion and are able to take this time to drive development and training in your workplace. In addition, consider low or no cost things that you can offer to your employees and reinforce those programs you already have in place that may be particularly helpful during this challenging time. For example, actively promoting your employee assistance program. This is a free benefit that many of you offer that has incredibly high value and yet is classically the lowest utilized benefit that we offer. Maybe provide virtual lunch and learns offered by the Institute for Financial Literacy or perhaps the credit union or bank that your organization works with. Consider temporarily increasing leave accruals or implement a stock option plan. If you need to reduce employees' hours or pay, this gives them an upside for sticking with you. And if you're letting employees go, perhaps reassign a member of your HR team to assist them with updating their resume, LinkedIn profile, and if possible, offer external outplacement services like assessments, coaching, job skills, and or job search and interviewing skills. So I'm suspecting that many of us on this call are more in line with this reality today, that we must reduce our staff. The only option for us is to cut. Something has to give or our company is not going to survive. If this applies to you, initial cuts may be possible by asking for volunteers. Perhaps you have an employee who wants to move closer to family or friends, or just wants to take some time off. After that, consider pay and hours cuts, furloughs, rolling furloughs with job attached status, and consider exploring options to secure low interest loans and access other programs that are coming online daily to support businesses in staying afloat during this time. So let's take a closer look at just a few of these. As you consider your options, be sure that you're remaining in compliance with federal laws related to exemption status, as well as insurance and benefits eligibility requirements. So as we can see here, effective January 1 of this year, the threshold for an employee to be exempt was raised to $35,568 annually. So if you're doing pay cuts, for instance, or hours cuts, and doing prorated cuts to an exempt employee's pay, be sure that we're not falling below this threshold, or you may need to convert them to an hourly basis. We also have COBRA implications. Reducing hours below full time may trigger COBRA if it's longer than a month. Other benefits eligibility issues may be around life and disability insurance, your 401k plans. All of that is important to understand for your organization where these legal implications come in so that we can account for those. And we have a number of experts on our panel who are available to assist you today and in our future sessions with these types of questions. But I really encourage you to take advantage of the opportunity to consult with your benefits broker, your internal or external HR resources, as well as your employment attorney. All right, so there've been a lot of questions lately that we've been fielding around, like what is the difference between a layoff, a furlough, and the different things that we can do to allow our employees to access unemployment benefits. So there are some subtle differences between layoffs and furloughs, and this is usually related to whether those employees are expected to return or be called back to work within some reasonable period of time. There's also ways that we can flex or combine options. For example, we could place employees on a rolling furlough whereby they work 3/4 of the month, so three weeks of the month, and therefore they'd be eligible to receive full unemployment benefits for the week that they're off. This has an added advantage of meeting most insurance plans' requirement that the employee average at least 30 or more hours per week. In addition, employees can be paid off, and I am referencing specifically Colorado here. This may be available in other states as well. If you have employees in other states, we just need to be sure that we're checking those programs in those other states. But here in Colorado, we can file a claim with job attached status for up to 16 weeks and be exempt from the job search requirements. For instance, looking for a new job and documenting those job search activities. In addition, employees can earn up to 25% of their weekly benefit and still receive their full weekly benefit. So that time could be spent working with you for just a portion of their regularly scheduled work week, or it could be working, doing a side gig or some other opportunity. Another thing that we're keeping an eye on now is whether that standard 1-week waiting period may be waived as part of ongoing efforts to ease the financial burden for workers. So we'll keep an eye on that. That hasn't come through on my feed yet today, but hopefully we'll see that in the near future. In addition, I wanted to introduce you to the Colorado Workshare program if you're not already familiar with this. I highly encourage you to check this out if you're in the process of laying off or furloughing employees. So as you can see, this is a way to access prorated unemployment benefits for your employees and give them the opportunity to work another job. So different than what we might typically do, which is just lay our employees off, and then they have to conduct a job search, or if they have job attached status, they would be exempt from that requirement. But this program actually allows your employees to work part-time for you and work for another employer, and those wages from that other employer will not be considered and therefore would not reduce their benefits. So this is an interesting program to be looking in. There's additional requirements. For instance, you have to have a positive premium balance in your company's unemployment insurance account. And there's other dimensions to this as well. So during the Q&A, I'm happy to take calls on this, or feel free to reach out after this webinar. This, of course, as you know, our slides are going to be available as a resource for you. So I just popped in this particular quick resource guide for you and your employees to access key information and links on CDLE's website. All right, so now turning to you as a business owner, for those of you who are business owners, one of my go-to resources right now to keep up with announcements and programs available to Colorado employers is the COVID-19 Business Resource Center that's hosted by our Colorado Office of Economic Development. So on that website, you'll find information and links. For example, the link to apply for an SBA Economic Injury Disaster Loan is right there on that website. So I have been tapping this website several times a day to see what new is coming online. With respect to these SBA loans, these are different than a regular SBA loan that you might have for your business. This is tied to a declaration of a disaster, which we do have for Colorado. And this allows you to apply for a very low interest loan, and you're not going through that process you would typically go through by applying through a bank. This is a direct application with the federal government. And as I say, the links for that and more information you can find on this Business Resource Center. In addition, I've been tracking some of the private sector and nonprofit options that are out there. Amazon just a couple days ago announced a program that you can apply for. Intuit has teamed up with GoFundMe. This was just announced yesterday as a way that you could raise funds. Facebook has a program, and you can see here to the right some other programs that are available. And these, again, you can access all of these links through the Business Resource Center. All right, and breaking news from last night. I was working on slides, getting ready for today, late last night when the news came across that Congress has arrived at an agreement, and that bill should be passed today for a $2 trillion stimulus package. And you can see that this is going to include payments to individuals and families, expanded unemployment benefits, small business loans, and loans to distressed companies that you may be able to take advantage of. So we'll stay on top of that and continue to share that information with you.
Right, Debbie, you shared, so Debbie, one thing, you shared a lot of great resources here, and I just want to encourage all those attendees that are listening right now to go ahead and either the chat or send an email later after this call. If you have any resources that you found that were extremely helpful, either with your business or just for the crisis overall, please share with everybody on this, with the other attendees so they can benefit from that. And then feel free to send them, your resources to me. I will also post them on the landing page after this discussion.
Fantastic. Great, Sam. Thank you. All right, so one final law to consider is the Worker Adjustment and Retraining Notification Act, more commonly referred to as the WARN Act. And some of you have reached out to us with questions on this in in recent days. What I wanted to specifically draw your attention to here is this last bullet, that layoffs due to unforeseeable business circumstances, faltering companies, and natural disasters may be eligible for an exception to the WARN Act. So when this kind of tsunami of circumstances comes across our business, we may be exempt from the WARN Act. So again, I'd encourage you to reach out to your internal or external HR consultants or your employment attorney for guidance on that. All right, so we're gonna just move right into our last topic for today, and then we'll open the floor to your questions for any of the panelists who've participated in today's call. So this is going to be just a brief high-level overview of the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, so the FFCRA, as well as Colorado's HELP rules. And we'll also share a few examples of leave policies. We'll then plan to include more detailed insights regarding policies related to sick leave, benefits eligibility, FMLA, ADA, the Affordable Care Act, you name it. We'll plan to address some of these in more detail in our upcoming forums. All right, so the FFCRA is an expanded Family and Medical Leave Act. So far, this has been in place through December 31st of this year and covers, for our purposes, most of you are probably private employers, so private employers with less than 500 employees, with this exception for certain employers who have less than 50 employees. So the information that I've included on this and the next few slides is pulled directly off of the U.S. Department of Labor's website. And you can access this, of course, and we'll continue to share information with you as well. All right, so here's kind of the basic provisions under the FFCRA. Covered employers need to provide 2 weeks, at least 2 weeks, of expanded family and medical leave. And here are the situations that this would apply. It's actually a very narrowly construed law. And so you can see if an employee is unable to work because they are quarantined or experiencing symptoms or seeking a diagnosis, or employees who have a bona fide need to care for an individual subject to quarantine, or a child under age 18 whose school is closed, etc. And the key thing here is the word bona fide. We are seeing people, unfortunately, during this time who are taking advantage of some of the laws and provisions for people to be taking time off. And so it's, you may be looking at putting in policies to verify, for instance, that someone is scheduled for a test or is going for a test or is under specific medical care. And then lastly, on the FFCRA, we have a couple provisions to be aware of. One is the posting requirement. So similar to your OSHA posters and workers' comp posters, there's an FFCRA posting that you'll want to have posted in a conspicuous place. Now, given that a lot of employers and companies are shut down, this conspicuous place may be on the homepage of your website, your intranet, etc. And then there's also some provisions for tax credits if this applies to you. Moving on to the state level, we have the Colorado HELP rules that were passed. Actually, they were passed only for 30 days. So we'll need to keep an eye on whether this gets extended, as I expect that it will. This requires up to 4 days of paid sick leave. And I have this highlighted because this only applies to employees who are being tested for the virus in these specific industries. Also note that this requirement to add these extra 4 days of paid sick leave is not in addition to sick leave that you already have, and it doesn't cover any wage replacement. All right, last but not least, and I do not expect you to read through these as I discuss this last thing, but here's some examples of portions of policies that we've been working with clients with. In this particular case, this organization was looking at providing up to 14 days of special temporary paid sick leave and the requirements that would go along with that. So these are just a few examples of policies to get you started. We'd love to hear what you're doing for your employees as well. If you have an opportunity to pop those in the chat or share with those later, we can share those with our colleagues as well. And with that, I'd like to turn things back over to Sam, who will facilitate our general Q&A session. Thank you so very much, and we look forward to responding to your questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Debbie. We have a lot of great questions here and to start off with that are kind of, and they're going to jump across the different topics that we discussed today. So, so let me start with the first ones. Here, managers are under a great deal of stress and may lash out inappropriately to employees. How can we better support our managers to be more successful and reduce this stress? So let's open it up to the panelists that you guys can all come off mute there.
Well, I would say that I've actually experienced that with my own company, being very transparent and very vulnerable to admit such. You know, even during our Zoom calls, we've had some of our leaders, you know, express that they were angry, frustrated. I think the best thing to do is to, you know, acknowledge that we need to rise up to this occasion, and like I said earlier, go back to our values as leaders, and then have separate conversations as leaders and say, you know, how can we lead differently in this environment? How can we acknowledge maybe we made a mistake in how we communicated to our employees, and how can we move forward in a better way to support our people?
I would add to that to talk with your leaders about the fact that we are under a high emotional time because of the uncertainty that we're facing, and to know that going forward. And that means that if you have a tough conversation in front of you, or you're talking with your team about something that is not going right, that you yourself are preparing in advance for that tough conversation, and making sure that you have opportunity to take pauses when needed. And that is actually one of the most key things, is if you feel like you are starting to get emotionally hijacked, that the best thing to do is to take a breath. And if you're in the middle of a meeting, that would mean that, you know, have some other person take over and start to manage the conversation, and you just allow yourself to listen, process before you start to re-engage.
I would also add is that it's important to just have a message come out from their highest levels of leadership, acknowledging that we're all under a great deal of stress right now, and that it's important to have a little bit more of an understanding of the frustrations, and that there may be times where people may say things that are offensive and so forth, just due to the sheer stress that we're under, and to be a little bit more understanding and accommodating in this particular time. But nonetheless, we should all understand if there's a particular complaint, to always be ensured to reach out to your manager and have that open communication, or reach out to your HR business consultant to ensure that they know, so that they can help coach that manager and make that a little bit more successful environment for everybody, and remove that stress. Anybody else have anything that they would like to add? Okay, so the next question we have is, right here. So the question is, a lot of employees are asking for modifications to their home offices, such as chairs, stand-up desks, etc., like this. So how would you how do you think that the business should respond to this?
I think that there's a number of factors to take into account. One of those is to look at the financial resources of the organization and whether that's a possibility. I feel like there's a lot of our employees that don't understand the underlying financial dynamics of the organization. And this is a time, as some of our panelists have suggested, that this may be a time where more transparency and more vulnerability, in the interest of employees understanding the situation that we're going through as business leaders, that they're taking those things into account with their requests. So if your business has dropped off by 50% or 100%, and you have employees who are working from home, and our role as business leaders is to do our best to ensure that the business remains viable and is able to get through this crisis in order to be able to fully reemploy those employees coming forward, and that there is some shared pain that goes along with that. So yes, if your organization is able to do that, that's fantastic. If not, I feel like it's important to have those conversations and maybe take an approach like you might with an ADA situation. It's like, yes, that would be great. I mean, I personally would love to have a stand-up desk right now, but the business can't support that. And so it's just not going to happen. So I think acknowledging the requests and that they're very appropriate requests, but we need to look at possibly alternatives to those requests if we're not in a position to support them.
Mm-hmm. I would also add that it might be also good to communicate that we're looking at a lot of requests across the business and we're prioritizing them effectively. I mean, some people don't have even a desk to work on at home, or don't have an appropriate computer and things like this. And so we're prioritizing this and working through the list as our budget allows. So to increase more understanding.
Yeah, and absolutely. I think just that personal relationship touch, really talking to your employees about, what your work environment is like right now. What is their work environment like? What is their current internet? Just like I said this morning, I mean, my internet shut down and I was very frantic about, oh gosh, I have this webinar going on and I can't even get on the internet. I just think, I think communicating and talking to each of your employees about their struggles and their anxiety around their workspace and their technologies and helping them problem solve, and then pointing them to the resources to support them is just really crucial right now. So it's all about communication.
Okay, I have another question here. It says that, just top of mind, what should we do if an employee contracts the virus or one of their family members gets sick? How should the business respond?
I will say I had a personal experience, and I won't say any names. We did have an employee early on indicate that she had the virus, but actually she did not, and she falsely claimed that. So, I think you always have to be compassionate and listen to what they're stating. But then I think you need to contact the hospitals and your resources to decide what to do from an emergency response standpoint. But we had that early on, even in our own company.
I think it's important to follow the protocols that are being put out by the CDC and our local agencies as well, in terms of I love Shar's approach. It's like, first let's validate that that's actually true, because the implications of someone saying that and not actually having the virus could be exponential as we're trying to determine who did that individual come in contact with in the workplace, or with our customers, or with our suppliers, etc. So first, trust but verify, and then follow protocols for notifications, being sure to follow any HIPAA guidance, and then take appropriate measures as needed. And we may need to reach out to some resources outside of ourselves if we haven't experienced this type of situation before, so that so that we're following the appropriate protocols, because the reality is our organizations could have some liability. There could be claims and lawsuits. Let's say that we have an employee that does have the virus and we allowed them to even work in our workplace for an additional, half a day. Now, based on how long this virus lives on surfaces, other people could contract that. We would be looked at as employers. Did we take the appropriate precautions to ensure that our employees are safe? So I would definitely be conservative, err on the caution side, and take more, I'll say severe, but take more stringent measures to ensure that we're protecting our other employees and anyone who has contact with the business.
I will also thank you, Debbie, and I would also say that we took the approach of transparency. So our business partners that our employee resided in, we contacted them directly and let them know transparently what was happening, because we felt even though we were unable to verify and confirm 100%, we had a responsibility to do as such, and despite what the implications would happen to our business. So I would anticipate other employers are going to be facing a similar struggle. But first and foremost, just take care of your people and be honest.
Great feedback. Thank you. So I just wanted to interrupt our questions right now just to talk to our attendees. We're planning a list of topics for next week, and would love to hear your feedback. If you have some topics that you would like to hear or even dive into a little bit more detail of what we discussed today, please include that in the comments section or the chat session, or send me an email with your suggestions there, and we will include that on the discussion items for next week. All right, let's go to the next question here. Let's see, this is a little bit more technical question. How does the stimulus package just passed by Congress impact nonprofit organizations?
So from the information that I saw that came in last night, there wasn't any specific assistance to nonprofit organizations, but that is just basic on this high-level news reporting that we've seen. And so I think that we'll need to be tracking that as that legislation is hopefully passed today, how it extends beyond small businesses and individuals and families. So it's a fantastic question, and we'll make a note of that to share with you if we have that information by the time we send out our follow-up to today's webinar. We'll share that then. If not, we'll be sure to track that and share that with you going forward.
And just another thought for all those that are listening out there, if we come to more information, we'll reach out to you individually and send that information to you. And also we'll share that as part of our resources. Okay, we have another question here. We've had a lot of questions from employees who've been out of the healthcare setting because of symptoms, but cannot obtain a COVID-19 test due to shortages. Are they eligible for the 4 days of covered leave under Colorado? Is that question clear, you guys?
I think so, and I'm not going to hold myself out as the expert on the Colorado health law, but it is up to 4 days of paid leave for testing. And so I might actually throw out, if we have a couple of our employment attorneys on the line who may be tracking this more closely, if you have any input on an answer to that question.
Yeah, so what we can do is, if there's a little bit more details, we can gather that information and follow back up with you. All right, so I'll include that.
Great.
Some of these are a little bit more technical. Let's see, do we need to set up a separate sick bank for the FFCRA Or can we require employees to use the current sick hours if their balance exceeds 80 hours?
Okay, so my understanding is that it can run simultaneous.
Okay. Here's another question. My organization is going to combine layoffs, furloughs, and salary reductions, then ask exempt employees to take 50% pay cut. What needs to be considered from the perspective of hourly expectations? Would the norm be less hours? Additionally, if an exempt employee were to drop below the minimum wage, they would need to be converted to hourly. Is that correct? I mean,
All right, so I think I'm understanding those questions right. If not, feel free to pop in the chat some clarifications. So it's two different approaches to reduce people's hours, but keep their pay the same, like on an hourly or prorated salary basis, versus reducing their pay. So some companies are, for instance, and I have seen, up to 50% pay cuts. That presumption then would be then that is still a full-time job with a 50% pay cut. So I think we do need to be clear with employees what the expectations are. Are we cutting their hours in half and therefore correspondingly their pay is cut in half? Or is it some combination of the two? And that's a very different message to the employee. One of the things that we didn't really address on the call today is something that Erin had shared with the panelists in our discussions leading up to this webinar, and that was we know that people are being challenged. It's challenging for them to stay productive. Like expecting an employee to work from home 8 hours a day right now is a little bit challenging. So we may be cutting pay, cutting the expectations of the hours. They can be correlated to each other, or it can be independent. So you could, of course, you could have, here's a 50% pay cut, and then we're cutting your hours 50%. That's actually a 75% pay cut, but the expectation of the hours worked is much lower. So hopefully that answers the question, but feel free to pop some additional clarification in as well.
Well, we are coming to the end of the 90-minute session. We do plan on staying on a little bit longer to take some further questions. But for those that need to drop off, let me just do some closing comments here. Following this meeting, we'll be sending an email out to all of you, but in reminding you of where to find the recorded webinar. It's going to be on the CompTeam website, so compteam.net. You see the recorded webinar there. There's also going to be a hard copy of the slides and a list of additional resources. And so I'll be putting that together. It'll probably take me a few hours to combine all that and post that. So best to look for that tomorrow. All right. Would any of the panelists like to say anything as far as closing remarks before we go on to further questions?
Yeah, I would. I sincerely appreciate, I was talking about my own experience as a business owner and also as an HR consultant, talent management consultant. We decided to put together this webinar literally a week ago. And I have just been absolutely impressed with the response, and all of our HR and experts have really jumped in and try to lead in this space. And to all of our business leaders out there, each of you may have resources, things to support our community, and that you may not be an HR leader, but you may have other types of resources to really support in this effort. We are going to continue these forums for the next several weeks. We're going to have at least 3 more sessions every Wednesday, and it's going to be about 10 a.m. on Wednesdays, the 1st, the 8th, and the 15th of April. And a lot of you saw this invite on my personal LinkedIn connection, as well as my colleagues' email lists So if you feel that you have resources that could benefit, please communicate with us and we will share. This is all about helping one another and supporting and making a difference for all of our employees and employers out there. And we welcome you to be part of this campaign to really support each other. So thank you very much.
All right. So on to our next question here. Many of my employees are working harder and more in challenging environments. How should we or should we compensate for this? So I'll take a first stab at this. So especially in short-term types of shocks like this, it's important to first think about how can you leverage your recognition program. We talked about simple things such as just saying thank you and acknowledging people for their difficult environment and stepping up in situations like this. But you can also send tokens of gratitude to their homes if possible, depending on the restrictions. It could be something simple as a meal at home, something from one of our fine restaurants in our local community that are serving and taking meals home. That can be a great gift. Other things as far as just doing a spot award or a project completion is also something that can be very useful in this time. Anybody would like to elaborate on any of that? Okay. Next thing here is
Great job, Sam.
okay. Next thing here is remote onboarding. What is the best way to bring on people, new people, while working remote? If companies do the remote inspection of the I-9, what should the written policy look like? Any thoughts there?
So what I would say is there is a specific page on the USCIS website related to the accommodations around I-9 checking documents as well as E-Verify, and I would refer specifically to that resource. And Sam, we can make a note to include that page in our list of resources. That would be ideal. So, and some of these things in terms of, especially some of these specific questions, they're fantastic questions, and I'm having conversations in the chat with some of our attendees and employment attorneys. Some of these things literally are changing by the hour, such as we did get verification just during this Q&A session that the waiting period waiver has gone into effect in Colorado and a number of other states for unemployment. So it's important to access the source resources that we're providing as we're trying to stay up to date with all of this ourselves.
Okay, here's another question, and this may be a little bit out of our area, but is it illegal for someone to make a claim if they're not infected? I would imagine so. And a follow-up on that, do I have to inform my employees if we have a case of COVID at work?
I would say I'm personally researching that right now with the individual that made the false claim right now. In my situation, yes, we were very transparent with all of our employees and our leaders immediately that we had this claim while following HIPAA regulations. Obviously we're not going to be violating privacy of the individual who made the claim, but we are still researching it. So if there's any input on that, I would appreciate it as well.
Okay. And I think that I've captured. Here's another a suggestion earlier. What are some of the tools that people are using at home that would help with the remote work situation, such as Zoom, Slack, different things? The panelists have any suggestions on what they've seen their clients appreciate and work best for them?
Well, I would say since Sam and I were using Zoom, we were comfortable with utilizing Zoom. I had another Skype call with one of our future panelists and speakers, which is going to be phenomenal, who uses Skype. But even just the tangible things like having an Ethernet cord. So I can attest to that. I've had issues with my Zoom being so choppy, even in when I'm talking. Some of those hardwiring things. It's also been a challenge because a lot of like Best Buys and some of the stores out there are out of the items to help people with their remote work. So you have to go to Amazon. So you need to think through these. Sam has been experienced with a lot of other tools. So yeah, Sam, maybe you can share some of those other things you do.
Right. So another thing that I just brought up, I mean, as we hear, you know, as we're doing these webinars and we're having online discussions and so forth, I mean, you can hear a lot of background noise and different things at times, and it's important to there is a tool that's called CRISP that's out there. It's brand new. It's KRISP, and it will help people in the home environments. It'll cut out all the background noise, such as typing, such as the dog barking, and different things. And so it can be a very helpful tool. One other thing that I would mention as far as technology and deploying technology at this particular time, it's hard. It's very hard. So because Zoom and WebEx and all these remote technologies that are in the marketplace right now are inundated with new customer responses. So it's very difficult to get customer support during this time. So if you have a platform that's currently in place that may not be functioning as well as you'd like, I would recommend to stick with that and for a week or so, and to allow some of this to get the attention of some of these other platforms that are available out there. But there's just tons. I would stick, like, in other words, I would stick with what you have for now. Wait for a week or so, and then move on.
And the last thing I'll say from personal experience, as of just this morning when my internet was completely down, I was concerned that Denver had a whole internet issue. We talked about simple things like getting your mobile hotspot to work. My daughter brought that up to me, actually. So I think just having just a backup plan, like if we can't communicate through basic processes, what are you going to do next? You know, if your technologies are not working correctly.
Mm-hmm.
One of the other people, attendees, posted in the question and answer, Barrett Chow, if you have Microsoft 360 account as a business, he said Teams have been highly effective, at least for his organization. Microsoft moved most of the Skype functionality to Teams, which I didn't know. So you wouldn't look into Skype. You can also use Slack. They have a free module, or used to, that can connect your employees. And Zoom, WebEx, and GoToMeetings, of course, as well. So just an additional experience to add.
Yeah, and with clients, I've used Teams before. It's a very nice tool. I think that's a good one. And then just for a secure remote environment, the AWS, or I think it's Amazon Work. I can't remember what it is, but it's an Amazon product that is pretty slick as well. I mean, but like I said, you have to get those installed. It might be a little tough right now. Okay, so I want to just share one thing that one of the participants, Kate, mentioned on one-on-one meetings. She says that they regularly have regular check-ins or one-on-ones. Managers are continuing with this like they did in the regular work environment. And a couple questions that are critically important, and these are probably the same questions that a lot of times are used during the regular working environment, but it's more pertinent now than ever. So what is working? And then where do you get stuck? So how do we remove those barriers that you're facing? And what can we do differently to make sure that your situation is more improved at home? So there's a couple of suggestions from Kate. Thanks for Kate for sharing those. Let's see. I think that we've worked through all our questions. Let me just do a quick sweep here. There's some that are a little bit more detailed. I think that we might have to dissect and get back to you on. Um, and and some more detailed, but I'll send all these questions to the panelists, and we'll get some answers back to you. Is there any so if there's anything that you want addressed right now on the call that we didn't cover, please go ahead and put that in the chat once more, and then we'll see if we can get to that before we adjourn here. Would it, go
I
ahead.
just want to mention that a lot of these questions and dialogue is going to help us decide the future subject matters and the future speakers too. So we do appreciate your engagement in the chats because we want to make these future forums, HR forums, COVID-19 forums, to be of value. So if, in addition to the questions, if you have feedback about other topics that are really relevant, please let us know.
Okay. Sharon just shared that Google Hangouts, the basic paid version of Google, is now free until July 1st. So if you're looking for a free web conferencing tool, check out Google Hangouts. Here's one question that that a person would like us to answer before we adjourn. If an employee gets COVID-19, what kind of support should we consider providing for the family? So I'll start with this, what some of my clients have been doing. So if one of their employees, or especially a breadwinner in the organization, they know has come down with an illness, and they're trying to do whatever they can to help support that employee get back on their feet. So part of that, what I mentioned before, is that meal services. Some of it is childcare type services and things like that. So, of course, the environment may be different in each of the states that you may be listening in from, and so I would look at what can be done in those situations. But meeting those basic requirements is quite important. Ensuring that people are, get food to their house when if they're sick and they cannot go to the store. There's been some services you can do there, helping them get those basic needs, and just checking in with them and on a regular basis to ensure that they're recovering and doing fine. Would anybody like to add anything?
Well, I'd say back to the basics. I mean, my conversations with my team is, a lot of my staff and leaders are worried about paying their rent and their mortgages. That's obviously a basic is your essential housing. Making these decisions about how they communicate with their landlords and understanding the laws related to that. I personally am going through understanding the laws around that, as far as forcing people to pay rents and not evicting them, for example. I think as long as we're transparent that we don't have all the answers right now, but we're researching these as best as we can. We will certainly help them through this crisis as much as we can.
One thing that I would add, because my husband has an employee who she's a single mom, and her daughter both contracted the flu, and they're not sure whether or not it's COVID. But they're offering support, they're staying connected with her, making sure that they're not overwhelmed though by a number of people within the organization, and maybe have one or two touch points that allows the kind of regular check-in, just the person has time to recover, replenish, and knows that they have support, but they're not being inundated by texts and all of that, and feeling obligated to respond when she and her 2-year-old are still trying to figure out, how to get well.
Right, that's a good point. And it brings up another thought that I had. Some of my clients have created crisis management teams. So as manager, you might get inundated with some of these things, or a leader in the organization, and you cannot handle running the business effectively and all the crises that this ensues, as well as the communication. So a crisis management team will help greatly with this particular point, and focusing on these concerns and making sure they're handled appropriately. All right, so let's wrap things up. Panelists, I want to give you guys a chance to make any final comments, and then we'll wrap this up.
Well, I just have a quick final comment, and just to say, please give yourself and your teams as much grace as we possibly can. Everybody is trying to manage as best to their capabilities, and so just allowing some more forgiveness than we normally would, given the circumstance, I think will go a long way. And I wish every one of you health and well-being. So thank you very much for being here.
Agreed. Great way to wrap up, Erin. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to thank those speakers here today, my colleagues Debbie, Karen, and Erin, in partnering with Sam and I and pulling this together so rapidly and so fast. This is how we rise to the occasion. And I really would like our HR community as well as our business leaders community to join us in this effort to rise to the occasion. And we are doing this as a platform and as an opportunity to do this. So please reach out to any one of us if you've got ideas or ways you can partner with us, and then spread the word, because I know our community and our employees really need us to do this right now. So thank you all, and we appreciate you.
That's a great point. And I just want to invite any of you attendees out there. I know that there's a lot of people out there with a lot of knowledge and expertise in this area. And if you have something that you can contribute to our next session, please reach out to me. And if you want to get involved, we will include you on the panelist discussion and give you an opportunity to share your ideas with the community, the small and medium-sized business community out there. I think it's a time for us all to come together and share the great ideas that we have. We'll get through this and thrive. Thank you very much, everyone, for attending today. Look forward to our discussion next week.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Okay. Take care. Bye.